Today, we will be discussing volunteer appreciation. With National Volunteer Week coming up next month, it's a good time for us to look into some different ways that you can celebrate your volunteers and their accomplishments. First, we'll talk about ways that you can identify your volunteers' contributions through the different mechanisms available in searching and reporting. Second, we'll go through creating automated awards that can be given out to your volunteers based on those contributions. And third, and lastly, we'll talk about how to celebrate your volunteers and communicate their impact. We're very excited about this topic as we're passionate about volunteerism and helping you make the most of your service database to engage and care for your volunteers. We have a lot to cover today, so let's go ahead and jump into it. So in Service, there are two main ways that you can identify and engage with volunteer contributions, that being searching and reporting. In some ways, these are tied together, but it's important to note the differences. As a simple definition, searching entails identifying a set of volunteers, opportunities, and groups with the purpose of making changes to the database, generating summaries, communicating with volunteers, or creating reports. Reporting, as the name suggests, is a way to extract information from the database and create digestible charts, quick printouts with summaries, or robust interactable spreadsheets. So let's take a look at searching for volunteers first. Now, when you run a search for volunteers, I do want to briefly point out that if you're just looking for an individual, the fastest way to do that is actually from the main dashboard. Up at the top of the page, there's this search bar, and if you type in someone's name here, the system will search the different parts of the database that relate to that name. And if you're looking for a volunteer, you can just click directly on that. This just saves you a couple clicks. Now, generally, when we're talking about searching in this context, we're going to be running an advanced search, which you can get to from this page under advanced options, click on advanced search, or from the main dashboard, you can go directly into advanced volunteer search. There are a number of different tools on this page. We are not going to run through all of these options today, but safe to assume you can basically find whatever you're looking for in Service. If you need help with specific instructions on how to identify a specific set of volunteers or how to find this, that, or the other, please feel free to use our customer support tool. You can always use that when you're logged in. Down at the bottom of the page, click on Need Help. Doesn't matter what you type in here, but click on Contact Us and you could submit a ticket through there. We do have a lot of articles in here, so I mentioned it doesn't matter what you type in here, but if you search for something like searching or reporting, you'll see articles that have to do with that content. That said, there are a couple very specific searches in here that I'd like to point out that have to do with celebrating volunteers, identifying volunteers that you'd like to celebrate or that you'd like to identify their contributions. So let's point out a couple of those things. Up at the top, there's a section called Service Account Status Options. In here, if we expand that, you can search for volunteers using a couple different parameters that can be helpful for identifying kind of longevity or perhaps active versus inactive volunteers. So specifically, you can find volunteers that have not had any account activity for more than a certain number of months. Again, this is more like finding active versus inactive volunteers. But you can also find volunteers with a start date between two dates here. The start date in Service by default represents when their account was created, whether it was created by a volunteer or created by a staff member or even created during an import. But this is actually a date that you can modify. So if you have volunteers who've been with you for decades, you can backlog that date and then use that to run searches for like how many anniversaries they've had with you. So if people have been with you for 10 years this month, you could search by that specific parameter in here. If we jump a little bit further ahead, you can also see a section on participation options. In here, you can find volunteers based on their contributions. So this is a pretty major way to identify sets of volunteers based on how often they've worked with you, how many hours they've served, or any other type of metric, like impact tracking metrics can be searched by through here as well. So, for example, perhaps you'd like to find all of your volunteers that served at least one time last year. So we could run a search in here for volunteers that have more than 0 times served. So that would be at least 1 time essentially. And then we can set a date range. So perhaps I want to look at 2024. We could say January 1st through December 31st of 2024. So if I run this search, I could combine this with some other things if I wanted to, but let's just run this initially. I can find all my volunteers that participated at least 1 time last year. So if we go ahead and click on Search Volunteer Database, that'll pull up this list. From here, if I want to, I can email this group of volunteers. I could do a bulk update if I need to. I could sign them up for events. There's a number of things you can do. But perhaps I just want to pull a list. I could download a spreadsheet in here. Down at the bottom, if I'm just looking for numbers, just kind of for my own edification, you can on this page see that number down at the bottom. So how many results did that actually pull up? Now let's say I don't just want to see volunteers who served at least once last year. Maybe I want to say, okay, of that group, how many of them have come back already this year? So I can actually go back into the advanced search, and then down at the bottom of the page, there's an advanced options section. And if we open that up, it says combine the results of this pending advanced search with the results of the previous volunteer search already being displayed. So basically what you're saying, if I flip this to yes, is take my previous search, I would like to search within those results. So I can actually go back into the same mechanism or the same search that we used previously. So we can go to volunteer participation options and say, okay, of those people, how many of them have more than 0 times served this year? So far this year, they've already come back, right? Or perhaps I want to say of those people, how many of them have not yet come back, right? You can do different things here, but obviously we're using the same mechanism, but we're combining this search with our previous results. So effectively, I'm finding all of the people, in this case, if I run this search, who participated at least 1 time last year and have already participated at least 1 time this year. So we can go ahead and click on Search Database. And then again, we get that number down at the bottom. And then I can use these results to print out reports if I want to, send out emails, do different things like that. So this is a pretty powerful tool. There's ways for you to kind of reinforce that or search for more specific things as well. So let me point out a couple other items in there. If we go back into the advanced search and go down to participation options, all I was using here was finding volunteers based on the number of times served, but we can also do that same sort of thing using hours. So how many hours specifically did they serve? We can also use any impact tracking metric. We're going to come back to these a little bit later. You can apply date ranges here, but you don't have to. And then you can also even filter those results by an interest category or by an opportunity tag. So perhaps I only want to look at a particular program. So in my database, my interest categories represent both program and location information. So perhaps I only want to view hours served by volunteers in the community outreach program. So I can select that category. And then if I say, show me volunteers with more than 0 times served, again, let's say this calendar year, that would show me any person who has participated at least 1 time in any of the events that fall under this interest category and any of its subcategories. So you can narrow those results further in here as well. And you can do the same sort of thing with tags. Maybe you have tagged some of your events as pertaining to a particular thing like training or education or something else. You can use that tag to basically filter those results further and only look at a subset of your opportunities as opposed to your entire database. Okay, apart from this particular search, you can also search specifically by certain events. Now, depending what you're trying to do here, a lot of times this is actually easier to accomplish in the opportunity database. Right here, I can see all my events. I could go and select things manually if I'd like to, but this list can be very long, and it might not be always the best way. If I'm looking for something recent or upcoming, that's what's at the top here, and that's kind of the easiest thing to engage with. But I could, quickly collect or select one particular item, or maybe a couple items in here if they're towards the top. That's not too big of a deal. But you can do that through here if you want to find volunteers who are registered for specific opportunities. But like I said, if I'm trying to find a more specific set of events, or perhaps it's over a longer date range, or it's really varied or spread out, a lot of times it's actually easier to go into the opportunity database. So from the top of the page here, go into Search Manage Existing Opportunities. From there, under the standard options, I could just run a quick search, or more likely I want to run an advanced search based on tags or keywords or a radius around a zip code or a particular interest category, right? So I could select some kind of more information here, run a search, and then I can select those events. And in the dropdown here, I can say view all the registered volunteers. And this effectively does the same thing. It runs a search for all the volunteers who are signed up for any of these events, right? So this is going to be a new search. It's all the volunteers who are signed up for any of those things. But let's say I want to narrow those results. We can use the tool we looked at earlier. So I can go back into the advanced search and say, okay, that was my starting line. Let's go down to the advanced options and let's combine our results. I want to say, of those people, how many of them are signed up for something next month, right? So you can actually use this to project registrations as well. I could say, show me people who are registered for something starting tomorrow through the end of April. Okay, so a couple other things here I want to point out. You can also search in here by no-shows and cancellations. That's not really the kind of major topic of today, but that is an option. But there are some other really helpful tools in here. In particular, you can find volunteers that have participated or will participate in their first activity between two dates. So perhaps you're really trying to celebrate volunteers as they initially start off with you. This is a very easy search to use to kind of procure those results. You could go in and say, who are going to be my new volunteers next week? Right, so I could project this into next week and say, show me everyone who's a first timer next week. Or perhaps I want to look back and say, who participated in their first activity in February? You can set that date range here, and it will show you any person whose first registration in the system falls inside that date range. And then there's one other here that's also pretty helpful for kind of identifying volunteers you might want to celebrate or kind of keep tabs on, is finding volunteers that participated in their most recent activity between two dates. So this is generally more useful, in my opinion, when you're looking back. So you can say, who was most recently here last week, right? So you could run a search like that. And again, this might be powerful to combine with other results as well. Or maybe you want to look for people that might be slipping through the cracks. You could say, well, whose most recent activity was actually last quarter? I could set a date range here of September 1st through December 31st. Find all the volunteers who haven't done anything since then, right? So this is kind of a nice way to see when was the last time somebody was, here, or when was their most recent time that they were actually in the building. Okay, so again, there's a lot of ways to search the database. What you do with those results is going to vary depending on what you're trying to do, and whether you're trying to celebrate volunteers or communicate with volunteers or print out particular reports. What you do with those results may change a little bit. So let's talk about that next. Before we dive right into that, though, there is one last thing I want to mention about searching. We've been running a lot of searches based on like date ranges. You can't necessarily save those searches, and you wouldn't necessarily want to anyway. Because you're running it for a specific time frame, but you do have the option in CERVIS to save searches. So if you're consistently looking for a set of volunteers that you have tagged a certain way, or that have certain attributes on their profile, maybe they live in a certain area or they're interested in a certain topic, you can go and run that search, and then in the heading here you can save searches. So you could give that a title, make it private or shared. Private means only administrators and the person who created the search can use it. Shared means that all of your staff have access to run that search. But these saved searches do not save the results of a search. They save the parameters. So if you've labeled certain volunteers a certain way, you can use these saved searches to kind of quickly find those results. And then again, you might want to modify that so we can go back into the advanced search and use our advanced options to combine our results and then maybe tweak it a little bit. One other kind of idea within that realm is you can use tags to kind of temporarily stage information. So for example, I presented the idea of searching for volunteers that have more than 0 registrations last calendar year, right? So I can go in here and set that search and find all of those volunteers, based on a particular date range. But maybe I want to use this search a couple different times, right? So I could go and run the search one time, and then I could take those results, and instead of having to consistently add that in and then rerun different searches, because with that type of selection, there's a number of dates you're choosing, so there's kind of a couple things to select. What I could do is I could take those results, and in the drop down here, I can say update these volunteers. And then I could go in and add a tag to these volunteer accounts. So down towards the bottom, I can say add a tag. Tags are not visible to volunteers. We talked about these actually in our last webinar if you want some more information about these. But maybe I want to label these as like 2024 participants. We can update that, add this tag in, and now I have kind of like a quick temporary search to find people who participated at least one time in 2024 because that's what the basis of that tag was. So now if I want to go and modify that search or kind of start over, I don't necessarily have to go in and use the participation options and all of these options here. I could just use the tag. So I could go and say, let's run a search by a volunteer tag. Let's find the 2024 participants. And then I can, from there, combine some other results if I want to. One other nice thing about tags is they allow you to quickly search by the inverse. So maybe I want to see people who didn't participate in 2024. Well, I can just say, show me people that don't have that tag. So these are a really nice way to kind of quickly add some complex searches to your system that you are kind of saving essentially for kind of easy access or to be able to run later. And then if that's something that you're done with, maybe you don't need to do that anymore. You've kind of done all the reporting related to that. You can go back into the tag cloud and you can remove those. So you can delete tags from here very readily. It doesn't take a lot of effort to do that. Okay, but let's talk about the results that we get from these searches and kind of what you can do with that. So obviously one very nice way to celebrate volunteers for their contributions. So let's say you're finding volunteers who have X number of hours in their profile. They completed over 100 hours. You could run a search for that using that same section that we keep going back to, this participation options. Show me more people with more than 99 hours served with no date range attached, right? So I can find that set of volunteers. I can take this list, and then in here in the drop-down menu, I could go and email these people, right? Just send them a thank you email. I could print out this list. So I could pull like a PDF or a spreadsheet of their contact information. Maybe I want to publish their names in a newsletter. So you can do a lot of different things once you've run the search. But one of the other really powerful tools, obviously, is reporting. So if I actually want to see, well, what did these people do? How did they accrue those hours? That's generally going to be run in the report management section. We're not going to dive super deeply into this today. We have a couple other webinars on this subject, but I just want to briefly show, if we go into report management, up at the top of the page here, we have this custom participation report, and this allows you to use queries. So I just ran a search in my database for volunteers with more than 99 hours. And if I want my results to only show those volunteers, I can use this query to say previous volunteer search. Or perhaps I could use a saved search if I have like a specific set I'm looking for. But I can use that previous volunteer search. That means that this report will only show those people who met that requirement. I can do the same thing in the group side of the system, the opportunity management side, or even using reservation codes. So I could apply any queries from any part of the database to limit what this report sees. And then this report will also use the date range at the top of the page. So if I wanted to see all of their contributions, I would just need to make sure to push back this start date so that it encapsulates all the hours or captures all the hours that we have in the system, from kind of all the way back to today. Okay, so there are a number of reports in here that kind of target different pieces of information. Like I said, we have webinars that run through kind of all of the reporting options. So if you want some more information about particular options in here, but generally the way that this is broken down, this custom participation report is an excellent report for pulling all of the information. It's a really robust spreadsheet, and you could sort by different columns and get all kinds of information in that report. Whereas some of these other ones like event or project participation or volunteer participation or group participation or sorting by interest categories, these are designed to be more quick printouts. So if you're just looking for summaries, usually you'll use one of these other ones. You can still get a summary in this first report as well. It just also has a lot more options to pull other things into the report. Okay, so that's kind of the idea of running searches and finding sets of volunteers that you might want to celebrate, or that you might want to, send some notifications or pull a list of information for a newsletter. Let's talk about ways you can set up Service to kind of automate some of that by using awards. So one of the things you can do to quickly identify those volunteers who you might want to celebrate is to generate automatic awards based on their contributions. So under Attribute Management, there's a section called Award Inventory Management. In this menu, you can set up awards that basically scale with your volunteers or are automatically assigned based on the volunteers reaching certain metrics. So you can give these awards kind of whatever title and description you want to. We have a grayed out example here of 5 years of service. But, we could give an award for, I just searched for everyone with more than 99 hours. So maybe I want to give an award for 100 hours. I call it the 100 Hours Club. So we can create an award for that. We can give a description if we want to. I usually say if you're going to give one of these flavorful text, the other one, whether it's the name or the description, should tell people why they got the award because they won't see the internal metric. These awards allow you to pick whatever badge you'd like to use. So there's a lot of options in here. So feel free to kind of scroll through and check those out. If you have any thoughts like, ooh, it'd be nice if we had this kind of award or this kind of badge, please let us know. We tend to add these pretty regularly, but there's a lot of options in here already. So you pick what icon you want to use. Below that, the assignment tells the system, how do I dole this out? So in our example, we want volunteers to receive this for completing 100 hours. So we'd put 100 here for kind of the number, and then we choose what metric we're applying this to. So you can create awards based on numbers of hours served, numbers of times served, or numbers of years. Those three things always exist. The years metric is based on the volunteer's start date. I referenced that earlier when we were talking about running searches. These other options in here for impact, we're going to talk about more in a minute. But these are things that you can create to identify your volunteer contributions beyond just the times served and how many hours served. You can create metrics that track things like how far they've driven during shifts, or how many pounds of food were sorted, or how many meals were delivered. There's lots of different things you can do here. But for this example, we'll choose hours. And then to the right, we choose the parameter in terms of how frequently this award can be earned. Is this something that people can get on a monthly basis? In which case, Service is asking, did you do 100 hours within this single calendar month? And then this award could be earned every single calendar month. Same kind of concept for yearly. Or we can do lifetime, which is what I would want to do in this particular case. There's two other options. This of service relates particularly to years. So this is all that has to do with. It's not used for the other options. And you can see when I change one or the other, it automatically selects the appropriate option. Let's switch that back to hours here. And then there's a third or final option rather of manual. And this is if you want to create awards that you are doling out more specifically. Manual awards aren't given to volunteers automatically unless you set up a connection in the database. So for example, I have an award in my system that's this like gold star award. If someone goes above and beyond, I could go and give them this award. So I manually assign this to volunteers every once in a while when they meet a certain or kind of exceed expectations, right? But you can also create awards like this dog walker or this driver award or certified team leader that can be attached to things like checklist items or particular events. So you could have like a training event that has an award associated with it that would be given to volunteers once they complete that training event. Or like for this driver, once someone completes a certain checklist item in my database, then this award gets given to them automatically. So you can do things like that to connect and make these a little more automated as well. Okay, so if we create this example again, the last thing here is the status. Normally you want this to be enabled. But if we create this example, we've added an award in. This award is a lifetime participation milestone. So volunteers will receive this for completing 100 hours whenever that takes place. Now, the system does have a buffer on these awards just to give you space to mark no-shows if somebody didn't actually attend a shift that would have put them over the edge of one of these awards. There is a 48-hour buffer for you to mark no-shows before someone actually receives the award itself. But the benefit of doing an award like this, or any of these awards you see in here, is that now I can go and search for volunteers without having to use the advanced search necessarily. I can just select an award in here. So perhaps I want to find all my volunteers with 200 lifetime hours. I can just quickly run a full search, or down here, 50 lifetime hours. If we click on full search next to this award, that will show us any person who has that award already on their account. So it kind of is a shortcut to running that search. And then if we go back into the advanced search, I can also see there's a section for volunteer award options, and I can say, show me volunteers who have 1,000 lifetime hours or the 200 lifetime hours or any of these awards that we were looking at. Those are all listed in here, and you can find volunteers with more than, exactly, less than, or between a certain number of those between different dates. Now, for some of these, like lifetime awards, someone will either have it or not have it. But for other awards, a volunteer might earn these more regularly. So for example, in my database, I have an annual participation award. This is awarded one time yearly. So a volunteer can earn this once per year. And if let's actually go back to the award section to look at this. So you can see there's this section for yearly participation milestones. So I have this annual participation, and this award is given to volunteers one time annually. So as soon as someone participates once in a calendar year, they'll get this award, and they can earn this year over year, which means I can find volunteers based on either consecutive or non-consecutive years contributed, like how many years they've actually worked with me. I could find someone who has 5 instances of this award. Now you might be thinking to yourself, that you don't have anything like this in the system yet. If you create an award like this, you can backlog it by using this process award assignment option. So you can see this award is awarded one time annually. So it'll already work for 2025. That's the year we're in. If I wanted to backlog this for last year, let's say I just made this award, I could click on Process Award Assignment and then just choose a date within that period. So any date in 2024, we'll tell the system to process it for 2024, and then everyone who participated at least once in that year will get this award. And you can do the same thing, going back to further years. So this same type of award can also be done on a monthly basis. You can give volunteers awards for participating a certain number of hours or times within a single month. So you could do the same sort of thing. I could give a volunteer an award for participating at least once during a month. In my example here, I'm pointing out you could use this to create sort of like a raffle idea. So you see I have this award called a raffle ticket, which has a little ticket icon, and it's awarded for participating at least one time during the month. And so what I could do is at the end of the month, search for any person who has this award for this month, and then use that, to create a raffle, do a random number in a spreadsheet after I've run a report, and then give someone an award, right? But this will show up for volunteers when they next use the sign-in console or when they next log into their account. If they've earned this award, they'll see it as a banner, and so kind of could get people excited about this sort of idea. Okay, so again, these awards are that idea that you're generating awards on a monthly or annual basis, so people could earn multiple copies of this. Maybe you want to do a raffle at the end of the year based on how many tickets someone has. You could run searches by that kind of data as well. So yeah, you can run, I just want to point this out specifically again. If we go into the advanced volunteer search, we can use the awards options to say, show me all my volunteers who have more than 5 copies of this raffle ticket, right? So you could find people based on that. You could do it within a date range. So again, if I'm doing this within a calendar year, in this example, I'd probably not want to do 5 for this year so far, since there's only been 3 months. That's the most someone could have, but I could search by that and see people who have 3 instances of this award already this year, which tells me they've served every single month so far this year. So these awards are great for being able to keep track of information on your end, but obviously the point of this is appreciating your volunteers. So what does this actually do for volunteers, and how do they see and engage this information? When a volunteer logs into their account, I'm just going to simulate that by switching over to my volunteer profile. But when a volunteer logs in, up at the top of the page, if they've recently earned an award that they haven't acknowledged yet, they will see that as a banner. So they'll see the badge, they'll see the name, the description, and they can click on this to go to sort of like a trophy case. So they can see all the awards that they've earned previously, and also how much progress they've made toward the next award in each category. So they can see when they had earned an award, they can see how much progress there are towards the next award in that category. So they can kind of see all that information listed out here, which this is great if someone is motivated by that kind of sort of digital badge and they want to see those awards kind of getting accumulated in their profile. But I think the best use case for these types of awards is doing something like a raffle, or doing something where that award is also maybe attached to something physical, where, when someone reaches this achievement, they get a pin, or they get a badge, or a patch, or a shirt, or something like that. It doesn't necessarily have to be something physical that you're having to purchase for volunteers. It could just be even identifying them in a newsletter. I think that's also a pretty powerful tool sometimes with this type of award mechanism. I want to find all my volunteers who served at least 200 lifetime hours. I could run a search based on that award, and then I can go and send out a newsletter that highlights those people. It has their name and their picture, maybe a little bio about them in a newsletter, right? So there's kind of different ways to sort of physicalize these awards. But to me, I think that's the best use case for this type of thing. Again, there are some people that are motivated by the digital badge idea, but I do think that it's useful to kind of have some sort of companion piece that actually identifies the volunteers or gives them something or gives them credit somewhere. One thing I want to mention about that concept in particular. So I have in my system this like 200 lifetime hours or 100 lifetime hours or 50 lifetime hours. If I am giving out, let's say, a pin at 50 lifetime hours, then I don't always want to see everyone who has this award, because invariably I've already given some of these people that pin. So what I would do is choose a period that you're giving that out. Maybe it's quarterly, maybe it's semi-annually, maybe it's annually. Perhaps you have like an awards banquet for volunteers. What you can do in the advanced search for awards, you can say, show me volunteers that earned, let's say, the 50 lifetime hours this calendar year, or since the last time I gave out the award. So let's say I do this quarterly, and I already did one for the kind of fourth quarter of 2024. So I could say, show me people that earned this award between January 1st and today. And then that would just pull up the kind of most relevant set of volunteers who perhaps you haven't already acknowledged. Okay, there's one last thing about awards that I want to talk about. I sort of alluded to it earlier, but it's the idea of using impact tracking metrics and giving awards based on that. So I have an example in here built out based on the numbers of miles driven by volunteers for deliveries. So we do a meal delivery program in our system, and when someone does a delivery, we use impact tracking to record how far they drove during that particular instance. You can use impact tracking to record whatever you need to. It is set up on the main dashboard under Opportunity Management. There's a section called Impact Tracking Management. We have a lot of material on this subject as well. But generally speaking, the idea here is you're creating something like bags of trash removed, grocery bags prepared, miles driven, meals delivered, right? Different ideas like that, things that you are doing throughout the course of your volunteerism that you want volunteers to record. You can let volunteers record these themselves, or you can record it on the back end. But ultimately, these can be used to generate awards as well. So same kind of concept. They follow the same sort of rules as creating awards for hours or times. Like you can see here, I have these awards based on miles driven, and volunteers will just reach those metrics as they're engaging the platform and as they're doing those different things. And it'll do the exact same thing as all the other types of awards. And I can search on those using the same kind of mechanics. Okay, the last sort of subject for today, obviously awards is a pretty big part of this, but the last kind of subject for today is how do we communicate these impacts and contributions from our volunteers? A big portion of that is reporting, right? So running reports to find all of the hours, all of the volunteers, kind of pulling those lists so we can add people to newsletters. Kind of talked about a portion of this already, but running a search to find the volunteers who are like your super volunteers. They've been here every month for the last 3 years, using your awards to run those kinds of searches, but then obviously acknowledging those volunteers. So adding their names to a newsletter, creating some kind of send out for volunteers, or physicalizing some awards for volunteers. All of those topics we've kind of already discussed. There's a couple other things that you can do. One of them is creating a widget that you could send to your or post on your website, right? So this is obviously kind of like a zoomed out example, but you can take a widget like this and add it to your website that might show volunteers kind of like the contributions thus far. This kind of widget, if you want more instructions on this, basically you can embed it and it essentially will just show a summary report of hours within a certain time frame, and you can change the label on it, and there's some other parameters in there. But this, in my example right now, is showing all of the hours contributed thus far this calendar year. And so you could have this kind of showing what's happening and how many hours are contributed. Just kind of a nice way to display to volunteers what's happening. But of course, that information can also just be communicated via reports that you might run and the information you get from those reports. So there's, again, a number of different ways to kind of reach out to your volunteers and identify the volunteers that have contributed with you. It's a matter of kind of turning that into something physicalized, whether it's addressing people in a newsletter, or printing out t-shirts, or creating pins or buttons or patches, things like that volunteers can then take as like a physical representation of the contributions they've had within your organization. So again, reporting is a big portion of that. That widget can be a helpful thing if you want to add something to your website that volunteers can go and point to, or that you can point volunteers to. But there's a number of different kind of ways that you can take what volunteers have done and then engage with them. Now we have different webinars on all of the reporting topics and kind of how to run specific reports. Obviously, if you have specific questions about how to run certain reports, again, I would point you towards some recent webinars. We also have a playlist on reporting, but there's a lot of good information in there on that particular topic. So yeah, that's kind of what we wanted to cover today here with volunteer appreciation. There's a number of ways to identify the sets of volunteers. And then, of course, what you do from there is based on your organization. Your volunteers and kind of what they would appreciate. I just think it's encouraging to think about the different ways that you can potentially find those volunteers and then perhaps set up some awards to automate some of that process for you, and even give your volunteers a little bit of a perk, as they're logging into the system. So it looks like all of the questions that we had today were answered directly by our team. Obviously, if you have further questions on this topic or anything else within Service, please feel free to reach out to our customer support team. I pointed out the Need Help tool earlier. You can use this to search our knowledge base. Let's say you want to learn more about reporting. You can search by that term. There's a lot of articles in here. But regardless what you search by, you can always click on Contact Us to submit a ticket to our support team. And then I've showed the YouTube channel a couple times. I know that that link was also sent in the chat, but this has a lot of good material as well if you need to learn more about specific subjects. We talked a little bit about impact tracking, but we do have a webinar on that topic as well. So if you do have further questions on this, or if you have any ideas or thoughts about awards or those badges, please feel free to reach out to us. So thank you again for joining us today. I'm excited to see the different ways that you will choose to celebrate your volunteers and the different awards. I always love seeing those ideas and how you come up with those. So thanks for your time today. I hope you have a good rest of your Wednesday, and we look forward to seeing you in the next one.